Hello, this is Dread from Epoch Builds, and in this video, we're going to be talking about the new uniques added in the hotfix patch 8.5 Charlie. These were originally meant to make the cut for the 8.5 patch, but were delayed due to some problems on their side. Now they are in, and we're going to talk about them. We're going down the list here, so the first one is Ashes of Okiran. So Petals, the normal version of this, is the quest reward from killing Okiran in a side quest in the campaign. It is the exact same as the old unique, but it also grants everything to fire spells as well. Sadly, this is a very underpowered relic and will probably not see much use. Most of its stats could be used on builds, but it's not enough that anything particular will stand out. The class relics have some insanely strong implicits, so this won't fight for that slot at all. It is cool that you can get a legendary potential on it, so it's kind of a stat stick for a fizz or crit spell build, but you would need at least like 3 LP to make this even worth your time. It can be gambled by the Soul Gambler, exactly how all the other uniques can be, and I think you can only get it from the Soul Gambler. Continuing on the trend of the quest uniques, Burning Avarice is the same as Petals. It is exactly the same as before, but it has been added to get 3% necrotic damage leech as well. The increased ignite effect is great, and overall these could be used on a few different ignite builds. The main issue with this is it fights for the same slot as Atrophies, and that is a very strong item with the 25% pen, and it's very easy to get multi LP on them. So it's very hard to justify using this over Atrophies. The necrotic damage leech isn't as strong as the elemental damage leech due to the fact that Lich has a lot of global leech at its disposal. So the only class that could use this probably does not need it. But in any build that would use an Avarice, like before, could definitely just use this as an LP Avarice, and this is a different way of getting leech on builds like Cold Dot Werebear where you don't have to use spell damage leech's life. You could just use a pair of Avarices instead, and that would work, especially if you get one with a lot of LP. So I'm looking forward to some of the builds that this could be used in. The fact it's just Avarice, but with LP is great, and I think there will be some builds that will be enabled by this. Soul Gambler's Fallacy is exactly how the old Gambler's Fallacy works, but it gives you ward on crit instead and gives you +1 to necrotic skills. On a non-crit necrotic build like Spirit Plague specifically, this could be a strong option, and to get a +1 to those skills, especially if you can get more than 1 LP on average than Omnis, which in theory would be straight up better than this, but getting more than 1 LP on an Omnis is probably not a thing that will ever happen in our lifetimes. This will have some uses, unlike the other Soul Gambler only quest uniques, and it's just a base Gambler's Fallacy if you just ignore everything else, and Gambler's Fallacy is a good unique. It just didn't have the ability of getting LP, so you couldn't just add other stuff onto it. There are builds that could use a Gambler's Fallacy, and now that you can get an LP one, it might actually tempt me to make a build with one. Theon's Chariot is a drop from the Sentinel boss from the Arena of Champions, and it is very interesting. Not only does it have a lot of increased damage and increased damage scaling with movement speed, it also has a lot of synergy with movement skill damage builds, much like Surge or Maul from Werebear. The ones that come to mind anyways. I don't believe this will count Warpath for the whole channel, which of course makes sense, so don't expect that to be a thing. If you can easily get some LP on this, then it'll definitely fit some builds. Specifically Surge, at least, will use this, at least at the top of my head here. Omen of Thunder is an interesting item. We're probably going to get a full totem rework soon, so when I look at this, I need to remember that. But to look at it at face value currently, with the current state of the game, it gives a lot of flat lightning to stuff like your Thorn Totems. The biggest problem is you have to use this on a Shaman, and Thorn Totems at base have a very low duration at base, which means that the buff could only stack like once or twice, kind of like how the problem with old Locusts were. Spriggan form has a really long-lasting Thorn Totem that could probably get 1 to 3 buffs on this, but you can't summon Thorn Totem directly in Spriggan form. The potion effect is great though. I think this will have its place, and the cooldown for summon Storm Totem is amazing. It's hard to evaluate this as I have no idea what the future of Shaman entails, and this will definitely make self-cast totems in human form viable for Shaman. But then you're a Shaman, and you're playing with totems. Like, there's that poison totem build that scales an infinite amount of poisons to get an infinite amount of damage, but I doubt that that build's going to live very long, especially with something like this in the game. So have fun with it while you can. Numbra is interesting. In theory, if you have 2 of them, you can get like 100% chance on hit to apply Shadow Dagger on hit with Lethal Mirage. Shadow Daggers take 4 hits to proc, and we have like 9 extra Mirages, and it's like, I think 5 Mirages at base. So at max, we're going to get like at least 3 to 4 procs of Shadow Daggers with 1 cast of Lethal Mirage. Is that good? Maybe. It takes both of your ring slots to achieve this, and this is pretty much a single target only thing. And for clear, it's kind of just useless because you don't hit enough things to apply Shadow Daggers enough with Lethal Mirage to make it work, because it's clear it'll steal all your Lethal Mirages and stuff. But maybe you just don't need it for that. Maybe it's just really good for single target, right? Like proccing like 4 different Shadow Daggers at once could be cool. The problem is the only good Shadow Dagger builds currently are like Umbral Blades. And I'll tell you this right now, Umbral Blades doesn't need this thing. So the only thing I think this will be used for is maybe the Shadow Dagger effect. Even then, it's not really that much Shadow Dagger effect. It is a lot of crit multi on a ring though. Crit multi on a ring is usable, and the increased damage with shadows is also usable. So this is actually really good on some rogue builds, ignoring completely the Shadow Dagger thing. So I think this will be used, especially if you can get like a lot of LP on it, but we'll have to see about that. Lich's Scorn is a very interesting item. The cold penetration per intelligence itself is insane for skeletal mages, as you are stacking intelligence anyways because minions, and they have a cold spell which you can turn all your adaptive into. So at base, that last line might make skeletal mages great again. 13 cold damage for spells and attacks per attached Infernal Shade is really cool. This has implications, mainly with zombies, but you can just attach Infernal Shades onto your own minions and gain a large buff. The problem is you need to make sure your minions aren't dying to it, which shouldn't be too much of a problem if you plan accordingly and build res on something like a Jurla's Obsession. The Dread Shade converted to cold, I'm going to assume it's converting all poison chance to frostbite and all the flat necrotic it gives to cold, but I haven't confirmed this yet. But I will probably post a note in the top comment if I figure it out by then. Now, just know that there's probably a few Necromancer builds that have just been enabled by this. Specifically, this might revive Skeleton Projectile Necromancer, but that will be something I will have to test later. Lich's Envy, on the other hand, also has a lot of potential. I just finished an Infernal Shade Lich, which this is incompatible with, of course, because it's a Lich and you want to be using Dread Shades, but it opens the door for a Necromancer Infernal Shade Ignite Hungering Souls build. So there is a node inside Dread Shade that refreshes the duration of all your Infernal Shades every time you cast a Dread Shade on an enemy. The idea is you utilize the zombie parasite combo with Dread Shade and just keep summoning zombies with it. I have a plan for a build with this one already soon. Be sure I will try this, and it has a lot of potential. I'm not entirely sure exactly what I would do with it, but I think that if you can find a way to recycle your Infernal Shades constantly and use Dread Shade to refresh the duration and something like that, it's just really hard to justify something like this because the biggest problem is you need to put like Dread Shades on, like, so you'd put Dread Shades on your minions and you make sure your minions don't die. and then like you'd place like an Infernal Shade or two on like a boss or whatever, and this should make Infernal Shade do enough damage to do boss DPS. So in theory, it could work. It's just I'll have to play around with it, pretty much. Pyre of Affliction is a new two-handed unique axe, or I guess at this point staff, because it looks like a freaking staff from the Implicit, and it has its own base type, and it has a lot of damage on it. It also makes you ignite yourself on kill and gives you a bunch of ward from transplant when you use it. It also converts ignite into damned upon you, and it also gives you a lot of damned effect per stack of damned on you, and gives you fire and necrotic pen, and makes you take less fire and necrotic damage over time. So there's a lot of to unpack with this one. All I really have to say with this is it will probably be used. There are a lot of use cases with this. It's just you're going to have to mess with it and play with it, because not dying is imperative with this, obviously, because you can kill a lot of mobs in a mono, and if you kill like 30 mobs, you'll have 30 ignites on you. So either you're going to have to be really good with your button pressing on your potion, or you're going to have to find some other way to utilize this. And I think it's going to be really good. I'm just going to have to try it out when we get there. Ashes of Mortality is a one-stop shop for all your ward needs. In theory, you could play a fast hitting ignite build, and it could give you insane amounts of ward, as some enemies can easily get 50 ignites at once, especially bosses. I think this ring alone will enable Flame Reave Ignite and bring it onto the scene. I have gotten confirmation from the devs that if you have 2 ashes, you'll gain like 12 to 26 ward per ignite damned on you or the enemy, and the 13% chance will stay the same, which is fine. For the builds you'll use this with, you will definitely hit enough for 13% chance to be consistent enough. And this, in theory, could be the sole ward generator for a lot of different builds. Expect builds around this one very soon. Peak of the Mountain is an insane helmet, but it's also insanely niche. The biggest winner with this are builds that are crit but build ward. Health regen builds with Vessel or Exsanguinous also come to mind. Much like Immolator's Oblation, this has so many different use cases that I can't even begin to think of them all. This alone makes crit Shatterstrike Spellblade a thing again, because if you want to use the ward idols, you won't need your HP, so it's just a free 240 to 290% critical strike chance, which Spellblade direly needs. But that's just one build. So many others to try with this, I can't even start with this thing. I'm going to be honest when I say this, Core of the Mountain is kind of meh. The biggest problem with it is you can't really control the immunity. This reminds me of Silver Shrouds from Blade Dancer, but you can kind of control when you use Silver Shrouds thanks to Smoke Bomb, and they're just used on single target anyways. I think this will find some kind of home eventually, but it has so much competition for being a body armor that I doubt any without LP will ever be used. It's going to need legendary potential. If this ends up being used, it will be much like Woven Flesh, where it's just more of a bonus than anything. It's a cool item, and I like it, but it's hard to see many uses for it off the top of my head, and I can't really think of why you would sacrifice your body armor for this. Now, obviously, in Arena, this is insane, right? In Arena, this is insane, right? But as with most of my community, they don't really play Arena, so they probably won't ever use this item. So we'll see. Foot of the Mountain was leaked before this, and I've already talked about it at length, but to reiterate everything, it is a very niche item. Not many skills will use the last line of text it has, as dodge is hard to stack outside of very specific builds. The minus mana cost is going to be used a lot, and one specific case I think of is Upheaval. Currently, Upheaval can get to a mana cost of 6, and if you stand still, you can get all the way down to 0. This is great, because the mana cost of Upheaval was one of the biggest things holding it back from being a good build, as you kind of wanted to spam it much like Swipe on like an aspect of the Shark stacking build. Does that mean standing still is good? I don't know. These will definitely prove that standing still can be beneficial if it can find a home. The fact it doesn't come with movement speed and it has a low item level base means that this will almost be required to have some movement speed on it before you use it, so good luck farming it. Pack Severance is interesting. The big reason this is even close to being usable is the fact that it will probably not cost mana to cast your sacrifice from this. So if you have a different way of killing your minions, then you could easily play sacrifice with this and bypass the mana cost easier, and it will see some usage then. The biggest problem is, does this compete with like transplant casting sacrifice? Maybe. The fact that it has cast speed is a big boon for this, as that it would have been the biggest problem with this item. Definitely a build like it could fit into. Too bad sacrifice is too bad lagging your frame rate instead of killing enemies for it to be useful. But one day when your frame rate is finally buffed, maybe this will lead to a cool sacrifice build with something like marrow shards for single target, as marrow shards can sacrifice minions for you, starting a chain reaction for sacrifice and stuff like that. It's just mana is going to be your biggest problem. Hopefully this video gets you hyped to play Last Epoch again, as much as it has made me. I have plans to make builds with a lot of these, so I'll probably never get a wink of sleep ever again. I'm forgetting something. Oh yeah, I missed one. Zerial's Hunt, huh? Wait, this is garbage. Oh, okay, that was easy. This has been Dread from Epoch Builds, and I'm off to make more builds. Hopefully, not with Zerial's Hunt. Bye.